So then guys, today we have the battle of the mini PCs. We have got Apple versus AMD versus Intel. And today these are some of the top sort of mini spec computers that you can get at a reasonable price. And today I want to do a comparison of these three models that we got here. Basically the three titans of chipsets we have out there, all of them with integrated graphics. And let's see how good each of them are at basically performing different sort of tasks. So we're actually going to cover over, for example, the actual design, the ports. We're also going to do a bit of benchmarking, and also we're going to do a bit of throwing it out in real life scenarios with a few games, and also chucking some sort of creative tools and sort of programs at them as well. But first of all, let's talk about each three models that we've got right here, starting out with this model right here made by Geekom. So this is the Geekom AS6, and inside this we actually have an AMD chipset inside it. It's the 6900HX inside, and there's 32GB of RAM and 1TB of storage too. And also what we have is also integrated graphics of the brand new AMD 680M, what supposedly gives us about the power of, say, an NVIDIA 1050 Ti, but all in this tight little small package that you can see right here, which is really awesome. But overall, the actual design of it, it's quite square. As you can see, it's a cube. There's also a good variety of different ports on the back here. We've got multiple HDMI ports. We've also got a display out, USB-C, and also lots of USB 3.2 ports, and also an Ethernet 2.5 port as well. Then on the very front as well, we've actually got some additional ports too. Again, we do have a headphone port, we've got a USB-C, and we've also got standard sort of USB ports as well. And overall, the actual whole design, it's quite small and dinky, as you can see here. It fits basically in my hand. It is really nice and small, so I do really like that. So the next one we're going to talk about is this one here in the middle. Now, quite a lot of you guys who follow my channel probably know what this is. This here is a Mac Mini, but which model? This is the Mac Mini M2 variant, and with this one here, you can see here it's a lovely design. It's the only one that's made completely out of metal, as you can see, of this aluminum sort of unibody design. The design's been out now for about 11-12 years now, and Apple are keeping it all the time now, and it is still quite a great classic design. It might be the biggest, smallest PC that we have here in the competition that I'm going to be doing today, but the chip inside it is also really powerful as well. It's got the M2 chip, like I said, and this basically gives us 4 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores, and also a 10-core GPU core too, and also dedicated sort of video encoder and decoder as well inside, what is also really useful. But this machine only has 256GB of storage, and also only has 8GB of RAM. It is the smallest in capacity out of all of the ones that we have right here. But then talk about the ports on the back here. What we have 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, we have a HDMI 2.1 port, and we've also still got 2 standard USB 3.20 ports, and also an Ethernet port as well. Now obviously you can upgrade this with different parts, more things, put an M2 Pro in it and everything, but for today it is just going to be the M2 with that. Sadly though, with this machine there is no ports on the front, so we can't even talk about that, and it does seem like there is limited on the amount of ports there are on this machine. But let's now talk about the third machine today, and this is this here. This is an Intel NUC, or NUC, whatever you want to call it, or NUC. And basically with this one here, we've got one of the last machines that are ever going to be made by Intel for a NUC sort of range, or NUC kind of range. And this actually has an Intel 13th i7 1360p inside it. Again, it comes with a 1TB storage, and also at the same time as well, we've got 32GB of RAM as well. Again, the actual form factor of it is quite small. In fact, it's actually the smallest out of all these three machines here. It's actually slightly smaller than the Geekom that we have, and it's definitely smaller than the actual Apple Mac Mini that we also have. But there's other things as well. Let's talk about the ports that are actually on the back of this as well. So again, we do have sort of dual HDMI ports. We have 2 USB ports on the back here. One of them is a 3.2 port and one of them is a 2.0 port. We've also got Ethernet 2.5GB as well, gigabit. And then also we do have 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports as well, which is really handy. Then on the front, we actually have some more ports again. And as you can see here, what we've actually got a USB 3.2 ports on both of them. And we've also got a headphone port as well. So as you can imagine, and before we start talking about benchmarks, both of these machines here actually have Windows 11 installed on it, and this one here we actually have the latest version of macOS Ventura on it as well. So these are the latest operating systems that are not in beta but are available right now, and let's have a look then at doing some benchmarks on all of these machines. So to start with, I decided to do a Geekbench scoring to see how that works out on all three of these machines here. So overall, the actual Geekbench 6 single and multi-core score was quite impressive across the board. So starting off with the Geekom, you can see here that the single core was 1,968 and the multi-core was 9,434. Compared to the M2, what definitely does leap out in front here as being the top one here. You can see it's got 2,498 in its single core performance, and it's the only one to breach 10,000 at 10,016 for multi-core. Then the Intel i7 1360p, 2,306, what is still a very good single core speed, but only getting a 9,542 for multi-score. And of course, by doing Geekbench, we've also got to do a Cinebench. So I've decided to do a single core and multi-core performance on all three of these machines here, and let's have a look, see how well they perform too. So here we are with Cinebench single and multi-core score, and I will tell you this now, this AMD multi-core score is correct, but you can see here if we look at the single core scores, they are very similar amongst all three of them, but obviously the AMD for Cinebench is just a bit more optimized and it just works a little more better. So obviously it is actually coming out slightly in front for there, but obviously the multi-core score is way out in front with 14,670, whereas the Mac Mini M2, obviously, remember this is still using Rosetta, so it's not actually using like a full Apple Silicon version of the actual sort of software, and maybe that would actually help, but it's still quite impressive that it does actually still come out in front of the Intel i7 1360p, obviously for multi-core score, but just ever so slightly behind in single core performance. Now that's great for everything to do with the actual sort of CPU sort of side of things, and you can see that, but what about the actual graphics inside of these machines? How powerful are they? So the best way I could do this is by doing a 3D mark test. So I've done a 3D mark test on all three of these devices here, so let's check out what they did. So the GPU score for the 3D mark and the times by what you just saw there is actually quite impressive across the board as well. So obviously AMD was way out in front with 2,785, and that's because of that 680M sort of graphics, integrated graphics it's got in it. The Mac Mini M2 did quite well as well at 2,121, and then obviously the Intel i7, the built-in integrated graphics is behind there at 1,860. So the read and write scores, remember this is more to do with not actually chipsets, this is how these actual machines are actually built here. So obviously the Geekom here did very, very well, coming in at second place. It can do around about a 3,000 megabit sort of read speed, and then it can do about a 1,700 and 1,800 sort of write speeds. The Mac Mini M2 obviously was the poorest, and we have heard of this before, that Apple sort of cheaped out with the Mac Mini M2 this year compared to the M1, and that's to do with the actual sort of NAND chips that they're putting inside it. So obviously it is slower this time round, but the NUC, the Intel i7, actually came out in front this time with having the fastest sort of SSD inside it. So obviously it's getting a read score of 4,875, and then obviously a write score of 3,516. It's also worth noting at this stage that obviously with the Geekom and also the NUC as well, that you can actually add more an SSD NVMe inside it, or even change it if you wanted to do that, whereas the Mac Mini M2, you are stuck with the actual sort of soldered on storage what's inside. You cannot do any upgrade options apart from maybe an external drive. Benchmarks are all well and good, and as you can see the results there, they're very, very different. But what about if you actually use these in their sort of real life scenarios out there? How will they perform? So for example, with Apple, they're very good at building their sort of apps from the ground up. And not only that, they actually partner along with a lot of good sort of softwares out there and tools out there to do that with that. So for example, like Adobe, for example, and that's what we're going to be showing here, Adobe Premiere, because that is available on all three of these devices. So what I've got here, I've got the same video, and I'm going to be exporting it here, and let's see how long it took to export this video. And here we go. After doing that export, that 15-minute 4K H.265, let's have a look at the scores here. So obviously then the Geekom did quite well here. Remember, lower is better. So it did it in 391 seconds, which is very impressive indeed. That is definitely because of that 680M. But obviously the Mac Mini did actually a little bit better. It did it in 375 seconds. And the main reason behind that, it does actually have that video encoder and decoder built inside it as well, what will definitely be helping along to actually export video. So it's really, really good that Apple have got that integrated into their chipset. Whereas the poor Intel i7, it did it in 584 seconds. We're talking almost double the amount of time to export it. So yeah, it wasn't the best score there. And then there's also Photoshop as well. So obviously fiddling around with Photoshop on these three machines shouldn't be any problems as well. And if you are one of those people who are going to be really doing hardcore sort of raw sort of pictures, you probably wouldn't pick one of these machines anyway. You'd probably be picking more dedicated, more expensive machine to do that kind of performance. But moving on from this, let's now talk about gaming performance. How well do these machines go with sort of casual sort of gaming? So the first sort of game I decided to throw at these machines, but does work on all three of them, and that is CSGO, so Counter-Strike Go. Let's see how well that performs on all three of these machines. So I think there's no surprises here that obviously the Geekom came out in front with that 680M in front of it. So it's got 126 frames per second, was more than playable on sort of CSGO. The Mac Mini got 61.2, which is very good indeed. It's still very playable with that. And then obviously the Nut Course I got 71.6. I think at the day CSGO is just not fully optimized for Macs or Mac OS, whereas CSGO is probably fully optimized for Windows 11 far better. Then after that, I decided to step it up a bit, so I decided to actually put on GTA 5 and see how well that performs. Now with the Mac Mini, I've had to do a little bit of tweaking to make that work. It doesn't just work straight out of the box, so we do have some bits and pieces running out to make it work correctly. But let's see how well then it performs in frames per second on all three of these machines that we actually have right here by doing actually the sort of benchmark test marker what's actually built into GTA 5. So here's the GTA scores here. So obviously that's no surprise whatsoever. The AMD came out way out in front with 72 frames per second on average. Obviously the Mac Mini did use crossover and it still got a very impressive score of 53.4 frames per second. There was the odd time it hit 60 as well, but overall as an average it hit 53. And then obviously the Knuckles I got 60 on average frames per second, or 61 frames per second. Well, again, it's more than playable, but obviously for sort of full-on playing games and everything, definitely the AMD is way out in front there. And there we have it, guys. As you can see here, we do actually have sort of our performance. Each machine does really well in different sorts of areas, as you can see in this video. So obviously, you know, like I said, there are a lot of apps that have been built from the ground up for like the Mac Mini, but then obviously that sort of dedicated graphics inside this AMD is super good. Then obviously that sort of CPU performance inside this Intel NUC is also really, really amazing. They've all got their sort of strengths and weaknesses. But if you do want to check out, for example, this brand new sort of Geekom machine here, what has got that amazing sort of AMD sort of graphics inside it, and also got that amazing CPU, and to be honest with you, I would actually say for overall kind of performance wise, this is probably my favorite machine out there. You can actually get your hands on it right now by going to Geekom's website, and if you actually use the sort of codes that are in my description below of the video, you can actually get some great discounts on this machine right now, so make sure you check that out. But with that, guys, what is your favorite out of these three machines here? Let me know in the comments below. And also at the same time as well, guys, if you have enjoyed watching this video, please do press the like button, and if you want to hear the latest Apple news, reviews and comparisons, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and also hit that notification bell. Until next time, guys, I will see you really soon. Take care. Bye bye.